Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Andy Hodges, live from ZTN studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Welcome to our discussion, Illicit Finance in the Transport Sector. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Paper's TV network, ZTN, in partnership with Transparency International Zimbabwe, TIZ. Now, should you have any comments or views on our program this afternoon, please contact us via our Facebook page, Zim Paper's TV network, or via our Twitter handle @ZTN News. Alarmed by the level of corruption perpetrated by officials in state entities in the transport sector. This is a direct quote from Zimbabwe's former Minister of Transport and Infrastructural Development in January 2020. Illicit finance in the transport sector is alleged to be substantial, as exemplified by the hundreds of millions of dollars lost to tax abuse, the tens of millions of dollars lost annually to illicit procurement, and millions more lost to collusion between the private sector and public sector officials. Petty corruption, primarily in the form of bribes paid to lower-ranking transport officials, is also rampant in the sector, where a large number of regulators operate. The transport sector is an integral component to Zimbabwe's economy and acts as a type of facilitator of illicit financial flows from other sectors of the economy. The bulk of illicit financial flows in the transport is in the road subsector, which is where private actors play the most significant role. We are joined this afternoon to discuss illicit finance in the transport sector virtually by Ngobani Shabangu. He's Research and Advocacy Officer at Transparency International Zimbabwe, Honorable Brian Dube, Chairperson of Zimbabwe Parliament's Public Accounts Committee, and we will be joined telephonically during the course of the show by Sitsi Patience Mashiri from Seke Rural Development Platform, Richard Mugobo, a Mutare resident, and Descent Collins Bajila, a Bulawayo resident. I welcome you all to the program. Ngobani, welcome. Now, there's a recent study titled Illicit Financing in Zimbabwe's Transport Sector. Could you kindly give us an overview of the key findings?
Thank you, Andy. As you rightly pointed out, that funds are generally lost through illicit financing. And this particular study shows that Zimbabwe is losing lots of funds through various key points, such as tax evasion, the importation of transport vehicles due to porous borders. There is also the collusion between the public and the private sector in this. So basically, the study is making a case, or it seeks to build evidence that there is potentially revenue which is lost due to illicit financing within the transport sector. The study actually underlines that there is patronage, there is a weak governance in the state that contributes a lot to various outflows. And it also speaks that there is high levels of smuggling, tax abuse, and abuse of public power by abuse of public power of private power by public officials. So basically, the study attempts to make a concrete case that Zimbabwe is losing a lot of potential revenue due to illicit financial flows.
Thank you. Honorable Dube, welcome to the program, and thank you for giving us your time. Now, in the recent study, it was alleged that in research conducted, state officials who regulate the transport sector have been identified as some of the most corrupt public officials in Zimbabwe. What are your views on illicit financial flows from and in the transport sector?
Thank you, Roger, and thank you, viewers. My take on that is simply a confirmation of the fact that there is lack of transparency in the way business is being conducted. There is lack of accountability in the way the business is run in the public sector, especially in the financial sector. There is also an deliberate undermining of national development by concentrating on personal gains as opposed to national development in the infrastructure. And there is lack of responsibility on the part of senior officials who are mandated with the custody of public resources in the financial sector. And lastly, there is a lack of economic way of doing things, where unnecessary over expenditure is done, as well as fruitless the expenditure, where you could have actually lowered the cost of doing business. That's my view, really.
Thank you. Ngobani, from the research findings, what are the implications of illicit financial flows in the sector? Ngobani? Honorable Dube, let me ask you that question, because obviously there are huge implications. I mean, you have, from the study says that there's rampant smuggling, under-invoicing, even in some cases imports coming into the country and paying minimal duty, apart from the petty corruption, what the report or the study says is bribery, whether it be police officials and so on. I mean, it seems that there's so many state actors involved in this from different organizations. It's quite a worry.
Yes, indeed. I can confirm that it is a serious worry. And as a result, the state or the people of Zimbabwe have lost millions of dollars as a result of the loss of taxi income arising from smuggling. And secondly, also a loss arising from over expenditure, where purchases are done from the institutions or suppliers who are charging very high costs, and also supplying substandard equipment or services. And lastly, there is also serious loss to the people of Zimbabwe arising from poor investment strategy, and as a result, we have the infrastructural decadence arising from the poor services, where you find that those people who are given the responsibility to implement after having been paid huge sums of money, they do substandard jobs or do not even perform at all.
Thank you. Ngobani, I hope you're with us, because I'd like to just briefly tell us the implications of this illicit finance, illicit financial flows in the transport sector. Ngobani?
Hello. Thank you, Andy. The first issue that is of concern, I mean, for that has been noted, is the potential revenue loss. But whilst we cannot quantify or it's difficult to actually give a concrete figure in terms of how much potential revenue has been lost due to corruption within the transport sector, what we can do is we can identify some key examples, for example, that of massive corruption or massive corruption that has been involved in the transport sector. For example, in 2020 alone, people that have been importing vehicles that have been evading taxes, they owe the Zimra almost $70 million US dollars, for example. And also you have like state-owned entities that have been avoiding tax or that have been evading tax. Key example could be the Infralink, which owes Zimra almost 47 million. We have Zinara, which owes Zimra close to 7.5 million. And also you have got the airport infrastructure development company, which is based in China, which owes Zimra almost 200 million for evading tax from 2012 to 2016. So these are some of the potential revenue losses that we can quantify and talk about. And imagine if these revenues could have been channeled to some of the key sectors, especially in this particular context. We talk of the health sector, the education sector, and including even the agricultural sector. What form of development that such a revenue could yield? So, in short, because of all these forms of corruption, all these illicit flows that we are talking about, it becomes difficult for Zimbabwe to actually attain its SDG goals and also to actually improve the living standards of every citizen in this country.
We are now joined telephonically by Sitsi Patience Mashiri. She's from Seke Rural Development Platform. Sitsi, welcome to the program. Now, Sitsi, petty corruption, especially the payment of bribes to state officials and police, is reportedly common throughout the whole of Zimbabwe. But in your opinion, which and what forms of corruption are prevalent in your area within the transport sector?
Okay. Thank you so much, Andy. I think police corruption and license enforcement corruption in terms of driver's license, whereby some of them are paying the driver's license in a manner, so they end up bribing the officials so that they can get the license. And I also think that Zimbabwe is one of the highest rates of people dying in accidents in the world because of bad roads as well, and bad cars, buses on the roads, corruption. Because we are talking about the Buko buses also. Most of the people who join Buko, they give most of the buses that join the company, they are not good for the road.
So I suppose, Sitsi, the question is then, what can we citizens, you and me, do to plug these and other forms of corruption? And also from a citizen's perspective, do you believe that state institutions such as Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission and other actors, Parliament of Zimbabwe, are doing enough in the fight against corruption, especially in the transport sector?
Okay, thank you so much. I think as citizens, we should be responsible. We are not supposed to pay those bribes. If any police officer asks you for a bribe, you have to report. But then we believe that the parliament officials were in the oversight of that so that they make sure that there is no corruption in Zimbabwe. But then I think it's not working. That is not doing enough. So us as residents, we also have a role to play to make sure that we enforce the law. If you find anyone around Delport where the police is always at their road visa are trying to take a drive.
So, Sitsi, finally, would you have any recommendations to make to Parliament, Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure Development, and other state institutions?
Yes, I would want to recommend the Parliament, because I understand they do the oversight to make sure that there is no corruption in the transport sector. So I would want them to investigate, make sure that those doing corruption are punished. Otherwise, corruption will never stop if they do not do that. And also, I recommend the government to provide more Zuko buses. That's why myself level, I started my campaign on travel for women, especially in public transport. And also the roads, because some of these companies, they want to join the company, so they can't let their buses be traveling on those poor roads, especially Chitumbiza. They spend more than an hour from Chitumbiza to Harare because of poor roads. Whereas the government something about the roads and make sure that the cars that travel in those roads, they are safe for traveling, and make sure that those who do corruption are put to book. Thank you very much.
Sitsi Patience Mashiri from Seke Rural Development Platform, thank you very much for giving us your time and appearing on the show this afternoon. Ngobani, let's get back to the study and the research. The research indicated that business executives in Zimbabwe identified these officials as the most corrupt amongst all regulators. In fact, 81% of surveyed business executives identified the police as corrupt, while the CVR, ZIMRA, VID, CMED, and Ministry of Transport and urban local authorities were also cited. Of course, it's private actors and citizens who pay the bribes to these entities. In your opinion, how is it possible for so many actors in so many different units to be involved, and why is this so?
Thank you. Andy, what is evident is that corruption in Zimbabwe is systemic, and it's not by coincidence that most of the people that were interviewed were able to identify all these entities that they've been asked to pay bribe and so forth. And you maybe to illustrate, one of the respondents in the study actually pointed out that they feel that contracts or contracts that are being offered by the government, there's a lot. You are supposed to be linked either to a political party or linked to someone in positions of authority. So this seems to be something that the private sector is actually convinced that corruption is really rampant. And the reason why we have all this, like I said, corruption is systemic. There's a high level of patronage. There's a weak governance system within the state, and weak institutions to respond decisively and effectively to corruption. There are poor complaint mechanism. There's some of the weaknesses in terms of legislation. For example, there's no witness and protection. There's generally rent-seeking behavior in every transaction, every business transaction that you can speak of. So basically, we have all these factors, and there's a need for maybe a different approach, where in terms of responding to all these and ensure that the private sector becomes confident and they participate fully within this particular sector.
You're watching our discussion this afternoon, Illicit Finance in the Transport Sector. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Paper's TV network ZTN and our partners, Transparency International Zimbabwe, TIZ. Now, as usual, should you have any comments or views on our show this afternoon, please contact us via our Facebook page, Zim Paper's TV network, or via our Twitter handle at ZTN News. On the Dube, let me bring you back in. Maybe you could further expand on some of the opportunities for illicit financial flows in the transport sector, especially from the regulatory side and from the perspective of state-owned enterprises.
What I can say to you, Rogers, is to confirm what Ngobani has actually indicated. The corruption in Zimbabwe in the transport sector is widespread and systematic, and indeed the research which points to police, VR, PIT, local authorities, ZIMRA, is correct. Well, what is causing that is that we have a fragmented system in terms of the harmony on the conduct of business from these sectors. So for people to do business, they will then need to go through all these different offices, and it creates that opportunity for corruption. So what I would suggest is that we also need one-stop centers for purposes of ease of doing business, where the systems from ZIMRA, CVR, PIT, and local authorities in terms of transport management must be synchronized and be one. If you check from the Zinara Auditor General's report, there is an indication to that effect that this fragmentation of roads is also the room for corruption. And it is also very difficult to manage this corruption because currently we do not have the whistleblowers protection law, which may then enable private citizens who would have identified the certain corrupt activities to be protected from harm or from civil litigation, because at times you may have had an error in judgment and stuff, or because corruption usually is done by those most powerful people, either politically or financially. They have the muscle to fight you and fight you to the bitter end. They can skin you alive. So we need a strong law that will be able to protect the private citizens who are partnering with the state to fight corruption.
Ngobani, TIZ's study points out that illicit financial flows within the transport sector generally occur in the following areas, and I'll note them: payments for the development of transport infrastructure, payments for the use of privately and publicly owned transport services, regulatory payments for licensing and other GOZ services, and importation of transport vehicles. Please, could you briefly share more details on these with some examples?
Okay, thank you very much, Andy. on the first one, the payments of the development of transport infrastructure, we're saying that these. Hello?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes. Okay. We are basically saying that this is found in a very large contracts. For example, where contracts that are involved in developing infrastructure. I think one of the major contracts that we can think of is, for example, the Mutare Plumtree Highway, which was rehabilitated at a cost of 206 million US dollars. And also we talk of the upgrade of the Victoria Falls airport, which cost about 162 million US dollars. So we are basically saying that if such things are not transparent in terms of such large sums, that is where potentially we find corruption. And also, the second one is the payments of the use of privately and publicly owned transport services. Basically, the major example for that would be the NRZ, which dominates the rail sector, and there's an annual revenue of almost 80 million US dollars, which is by 2015 states. So when such payments between the private and the publicly owned transport services are not clearly defined, this is where you also find corruption. And the third one that you mentioned is the regulatory payments, basically the licensing. If licensing is not clear, there are no transparent ways in terms of how the inflows of funds, or we actually receive the funds. This is where you get your petty forms of corruption, which other speakers have been mentioning. And lastly, the importation of transport vehicles. Like I indicated earlier, that we seem to be to have lost a lot of money within our borders, because our importation of maybe transport vehicles is like there are opportunities for corruption. You talk of your tax evasion, undervaluing of cars, etc. So potentially these are some of the areas where we seem to be losing lots of money, and because of weak system and poor regulation. Thank you.
Thank you. We are getting Richard Mugobo. He's a Mutare resident on the line. But while we get him, Ngobani, I want to continue on the thrust of what you were talking about, because it's been reported, for example, that the Zimbabwe Revenue Authority suspended or dismissed 176 officials between 2016 and 2019 for allegedly smuggling 433 vehicles into Zimbabwe. Zinara has been accused of poor quality procurement, which prejudices the road fund of 39 million US dollars. I mean, this corruption, as you said, reduces the amount of money flowing into government coffers, and government, of course, uses that money for essential services and for the benefit of Zimbabwe's citizens. What's your comment on that? Ngobani?
Precisely like what you've indicated. The potential revenue that we are losing is a direct impact in terms of the general services that we receive as a country. And some of the challenges that we are facing in other sectors can be easily dealt with by sorry, keep receiving an echo.
Okay, thanks, Ngobani. We are now joined telephonically by Richard Mugobo. He's a Mutare resident. Richard, it's a pleasure having you on the program, and welcome. Richard, although there are some forms of common corruption in the transport sector, in your area, Mutare, what in your opinion are these specific ones, or the ones that really affect you in that area?
Thank you so much, Andy, for inviting me to this platform. I would like to speak within the context of Mutare being a border town with access to beira. Tax evasion and avoidance at our border posts is mainly aided by transit vehicles passing between Mozambique and Zimbabwe, which is the fourth border post. You must understand, Andy, that we are a border town and the gateway to the nearest seaport, which is Beira. So the Beira corridor itself is an illicit financial flow conduit where illegal trade in contraband goods is rife with goods and commodities such as fuel and second-hand clothes being smuggled in and out of the country at a daily basis. So there are existing operations of well-organized syndicates at the porous Fox border post in Mutare that have been facilitating smuggling, prejudicing the country millions of dollars in lost revenue. You understand, Andy, that government could be losing millions of dollars in revenue via the northeastern port of entry, that is the border post, due to under-declaration and false classification of goods by importers to evade paying the correct taxes.
I mean, Richard, you're mentioning the leakages through the border post there in Mutare. So, Richard, sorry, you mentioned... Richard,
on a monthly basis in Zimbabwe via points such as the border post, and they should be stricter.
Can you hear me?
The guys that it is in
Richard?
transit to neighboring countries, and yet it
Richard?
is destined for the and perpetrators brought to book. On another note, I identified these key drivers of illicit financial flows in this border.
Richard, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Richard, just very briefly then, I mean, what can we do, citizens? What can we do to eliminate or at least reduce corruption? Because the study does point out that that sometimes with petty corruption, when citizens are asked to pay bribes, if they don't, they may even get arrested. It's nothing to do with breaking the law. It's about them not paying the bribe. So what can me and you do, if I can put it that way?
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So combating illicit financial flows, especially smuggling and evasion of duty in Zimbabwe, with the context of Mutare, is a task that requires collective effort from all relevant stakeholders and the general citizens. So effective participation of the citizen is key. I think Wani mentioned about reporting mechanisms. There should be clear reporting mechanisms that can give confidence to the citizens in order to report such cases. And also on the other end, prosecution and conviction itself. There has been a worrying low rate of conviction in cases that involve illicit financial flows. More often, there's been a lack of political will to follow up on cases because some of these cases involve politically exposed individuals. We should also understand the context that breeds illicit financial flows, especially in Mutare. We have a socio-economic crisis that has provided opportunities that breed illicit financial flows. And this needs to be resolved. The smuggling trade on our borders is spread by rampant poverty and unemployment, high unemployment levels in this border town. So illicit financial flows should be understood within that context. And also on another note, civic society should maintain the momentum it is pushing in terms of demanding for transparency and accountability within the transport sector, especially within the border control mechanisms themselves. I'm glad of the work that TIZ is doing in this regard, but more needs to be done from the civic society.
Thank you. Richard Mugobo, a Mutare resident, thank you so much for participating in our program this afternoon. Honourable Dube, there's been reports of petty levels of bribery within the transport sector. I mean, you've heard both Sitsi and Richard there talking about the leakages, the bribes that are paid. I also mentioned the fact that you can be arrested for not paying a bribe. Nothing to do with breaking the law, but if you refuse to pay a bribe, you can be arrested. So the question is, of course, Honourable Dube, who are the drivers of such corruption? Is it state officials, private actors, or both?
The key drivers of corruption are poor systems that leave loopholes that can be taken advantage of. For example, the failure to have a systematic method from ZIMRA on actual valuations of cars it causes you to want to pay a bribe to Zimra for importing your vehicle on the basis that you are not sure if you do not pay the bribe that has been demanded, how much you can then be charged. In addition to that, you also do not know much about how much is due for duty for importing possibly or second-hand goods or anything from the Forbes border post that has been spoken about, where a majority of those things would come from Beira. You do not have a system of proper valuation. So if you don't pay possibly the bribe that is demanded, your consignment may be worth, say, $1,000 US, but you may be caused to pay 2,000 and eventually lose all your goods because you may then end up leaving them there. So when that person then calls for a bribe of $100 or $200, you are forced to pay. So the key driver to corruption in the public sector, in the transport sector, is actually the poor systems, the lack of transparency and accountability in the mechanism on what is exactly due to government. Because what is due to government seems to be decided and determined by a particular individual and not properly articulated in the system. So this is the main cause. So if we put our systems in place, and if we manage to put our ICTs, our cameras, our everything on the borders, as well as making sure that our citizens are empowered so that they are not abused by police, we will be able to deal with corruption once and for all. So how to deal with corruption is simply by putting strong institutions and strong systems that are properly funded and equipped to do their work. So in that way, you limit the human-to-human interaction, and in the process, increase transparency and accountability, and make sure that the monies that are paid are directly due to government and not due to individuals.
You're watching our discussion this afternoon, Illicit Finance in the Transport Sector. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Papers TV Network ZTN and our partners, Transparency International Zimbabwe TIZ. We're now joined telephonically by Descent Collins Badila. He's a Bulawayo resident. Descent, welcome to the program. Descent, if I may ask you, I would like your perspective on corruption and bribery in the transport sector. In your opinion, and looking principally, of course, at Bulawayo and Matabeleland, what are the most common forms of corruption that citizens face?
Thank you so much, Andy. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can, sir. Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. The most common forms of corruption in the transport sector, you could identify, first of all, people who have bought unregistered vehicles, people who have bought road and wet vehicles, trying to move along the roads and meeting traffic officers and managing to use money to pass through roadblocks. That's one form of the corruption that you always see happening around. You also have people who are using vehicles that are not supposed to ferry passengers, but they are using them to ferry passengers, and whenever they have to pass through a roadblock, whenever they have to pass through law enforcement agencies, they have to pay a bribe of some sort. So that's one of those are some of the most prominent forms of corruption that we see in the transport sector on the road.
So I suppose, Descent, the question is, I mean, you've mentioned there, and we've mentioned it previously in the show about paying bribes, particularly at roadblocks and so forth. The question is, what can we as citizens do about it? What role do we have to play? What role can we play in the fight against corruption?
I think one of the great tools that combat corruption in Zimbabwe could be the use of social media, because the institutions that we should report them, that we should report corruption to, seem to be very much becoming untrustworthy to the general public. social media is one tool that can be used, that if people can manage to be able to use their phone cameras to take videos, to take photos of corruption happening, to record voice notes of these corruption acts happening, and publish them out there anonymous. We can be able to do that. It will happen, and it can be done, and we can win the fight against corruption if we use social media progressively.
So, Jacinth, my final question, from a citizen's perspective, do you think that state institutions are doing enough in their fight against corruption? And very briefly, any key recommendations you'd like to make to Parliament, Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, state actors, and of course the Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure Development?
Andy, the state institutions are not doing enough in the fight against corruption. More could be done. I've mentioned the issue of use of social media, anonymous tips. There must be more incentives given to the people to come forward to report corruption, particularly corruption of the people who are supposed to be eradicating it. Those who are supposed to be policing corruption. There must be whistleblower systems that are strong, that have got strong rewards to start with for people reporting corruption. And there must also be punitive measures for people who have been caught doing corruption. And the criminal justice system must not take long, because the longer people take to find justice, the more it is easy for them to walk away scot-free.
Jacinth Collins-Bajila, a Bulawayo resident, thank you so much for giving us your time and appearing on the program this afternoon. Honourable Dube, I suppose the question is, what is Parliament doing to curb illicit financial flows in general, and particularly in the transport sector? And as Parliament, what kind of support would you need to strengthen your oversight role in curbing these illicit financial flows out of our system in Zimbabwe completely, if we can?
Yeah, thank you very much. What Parliament is doing is, for a start, we have actually utilized the committee systems to have investigations done on what is happening in the public sector. And we have made recommendations to the relevant other institutions of government. Because what you must understand is Parliament cannot arrest anyone, Parliament cannot try anyone, Parliament cannot convict anyone. What Parliament can do is to make recommendations to the executive arm of government, mainly to the police, to act upon information received and the reports submitted to Parliament, and then also what Parliament has also managed to do is to interact closely with the other institutions that are responsible, such as the Anti-Corruption Commission and the National Prosecuting Authority. And what is actually taking us back is also the unavailability of some strong legal systems. For example, we need a law to protect whistleblowers, and that is actually work that is being done, work in progress for purpose of making sure that we fight corruption. We also need to strengthen our institutions by making sure that resources are made available to the Anti-Corruption Commission and the National Prosecuting Authority, as well as the police. And so through the budget system, resources have been allocated to those institutions to make sure that they function well. What is it that we expect? We expect the members of the public to assist Parliament by making sure that they utilize the members of Parliament that are local to them and make sure that they have as much information as possible, so that when they come to Parliament, in the general sitting or in the committees, they must be able to be helpful in terms of giving information to Parliament so that we can act accordingly. So we need Parliament and citizens' partnership for purpose of making sure that things flow and things happen. We also expect a lot of cooperation from the executive. We need the Minister of Justice as well as the Minister of Home Affairs and Minister of Finance to work closely with Parliament and cooperate with Parliament, and also act promptly when we make recommendations as Parliament, because at times we recommend and very little is done by the ministries who are supposed to act.
Ngobani, there are increasing calls to curb illicit financial flows in Africa and Zimbabwe in particular. Why do you think this discourse is gaining momentum in Africa? And also, what would be your key recommendations to all responsible authorities in Zimbabwe?
Okay, thank you, Andy. There is consensus amongst developmental experts that funds lost through illicit activity, they deplete public resources. And for example, maybe let's talk within the this particular sector that we are talking about, the transport sector. The Africa Development Bank, for example, estimates that the transport sector requires financing of 28.6 billion from 2019 to 2030. And if you realize, if we do not curb illicit financing or law also funds through illicit transaction, cross-border illicit financial flows, we will potentially lose a lot to corruption to only a few individuals, and will not even realize the intended goals that we are putting in place. So that is why there is now a call. I think there is a general call for us to ensure that we actually develop systems or structures or key anti-corruption frameworks that responds to illicit financial flows within the context of Africa. And your second part of the question, in terms of what are the key recommendations, I think most of the recommendations have been indicated above by the panelists in terms of the role of the citizens, the role of the parliament. Honorable Dube has mentioned them. And I think maybe to add a few is that we need transparency in the public procurement. Our procurement systems, they need to be watertight. They need to be able to ensure fair competition. We should not have monopoly or political patronage, where few individuals that are connected are the ones that actually get huge contracts, and in the process they fail to deliver. We need beneficial ownership registry, for example, and we need general good corporate governance in public entities. Last week in this particular show, you touched a bit about the Zinara scandal, for example. So these are some of the issues that we need to engage decisively and effectively as a nation to ensure that we plug illicit financial flows. And also, we need, as the CSOs and the citizens, to ensure that all the citizens are informed and they are able to hold elected officials to account, and so that we can actually keep some of these. And lastly, we need a strong media that is able to investigate, to carry out investigative journalism, to share information on corruption, and to also ensure that they actually increase the momentum in informing the citizens on what is happening in various sectors. Thank you.
Ngobani, I can just give you very briefly, because I just want something to highlight, because your study says, of course, that one of the major reasons for corrupt activities, particularly by lower level officials, is the issue of remuneration, and that they feel that this is the only way they can supplement or improve their income. Just your brief comment on that. How do you get around that, particularly in the fiscal space Zimbabwe is in, to increase wages and salaries?
I think when we are responding to corruption issues, I think one of the most sensible or one of the most easier things to do will be that increase people's salaries and assume that they won't be engaged in corruption. But I think the situation is a bit more complex than that, because we are dealing with weak systems. There are lots of factors that are involved for corruption. If the systems are weak, and there are no regulatory frameworks that allow for people to be prosecuted when they engage in corruption, and if, for example, they are also basically we can actually increase salaries, but that does not mean necessarily that we will actually deal with corruption. I think the aspect of corruption is much more complex than what people think. So we need a bigger, a broad approach where we strengthen institutions. Yes, we might increase the salaries, improve the well-being of our civil servants, but also we need supporting legislation and other factors to ensure that we respond effectively to corruption. So, in brief, while it's trying to address one aspect of the drive of corruption is not enough. We need a holistic approach.
We have come to the end of our program this afternoon. You have been watching our discussion, Illicit Finance in the Transport Sector. I would like to thank our guest, Ngobani Shabangu, Research and Advocacy Officer at Transparency International Zimbabwe, Honorable Brian Dube, Chairperson of Zimbabwe Parliament's Public Accounts Committee, Sitsi Patience Mashiri, she's from Seke Rural Development Platform, Richard Mugobo, a Mutare resident, and Descent Collins Bajila, a TIZ. Well, that's it from me this afternoon. I'm Andy Hodges. Goodbye, and you all be safe.